Dr. Gagliano is a research associate professor of evolutionary ecology at the Biological Intelligence Lab, Southern Cross University in Perth, and a former fellow of the Australian Research Council. She holds an adjunct position as a senior research fellow at the Center for Evolutionary Biology at the University of Western Australia. Dr. Gagliano is the pioneer in a brand new research field of plant bioacoustics and cognition. Her research broadly focuses on ecological process by which organisms gather information from their environment. She's written multiple articles on the subject and is a co-editor of several scientific journals. This is her book, Thus Spoke the Plant. I highly recommend everyone pick it up and read it. Welcome to Seattle from Perth, Dr. Gagliano.
Thank you.
So I just want to start with sort of a question that's come up a lot in my own research, and I think it's appropriate to ask you. Should people feel self-conscious when they talk to their plants?
What do you mean by feeling self-conscious?
People,
Or
what is the benefit of talking to your plants, I guess I would say, and how, what's your opinion in the research of just sort of speaking to your plants, and how do you speak to them?
I know it's bad form, but can I ask a question as a response to this?
Of course.
I would ask, do you enjoy having friends around you and making acquaintances and connections? Does that enrich your life? Or would you rather be isolated, alone, and unloved?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So how does that and it's similar for a plant, maybe that sometimes...
No, I'm talking about us.
Mm-hmm.
They already love us by nature. They already know precisely how to do life here. They've done it for a long time. So we are still learning how to be proper keens to them.
Well said. I know you went from, you originally studied marine biology and then moved into this more plant ecology. What was the story of that transition from wanting to be a marine biologist to now sort of the focus on plant bioacoustics?
Well, I wanted to be a marine scientist and marine ecologist since I was a child. And so in a way, I fulfilled my dream because I did all my studies at university for marine biology, and I did my PhD here in Australia on amazingly on the Great Barrier Reef when it was still pretty healthy and looking beautiful. Not something that we can say of it now, but so I spent a lot of time outdoors, underwater. And when I say a lot of time, like months, every day, all day. And so you get to know your water body a little, and you get to also encounter the permeability of this body, and your waters and the bigger waters have more chances of meeting, mingling, entangling, encountering, and in that you meet all of the other water bodies. And I worked on coral reef fishes, and so I was doing a lot of experiments in the field, studying particularly behavior and the relationship between generations, so the connection between moms and their experiences during pregnancy in particular, and then what would happen to those babies depending on what kind of experiences mom had. So, and at the time, even this was quite controversial because it was the time of strong genetic-based explanations of everything. And so talking about the importance of maternal effects. That's how they were called, and they still are called that way, which involved not the genes, but the genes plus the behavior, the experience of, interactions in collaboration with or predation events and stress on the reef. And so all of the, I would say, the everyday business of being a fish on a reef. And now this actually was very important. And of course, he impacted how moms were able to package their babies and prepare them for the future. And it was during, I loved it. And I loved to be underwater and just spend time in that space, because you enter a different world and you don't belong to that world necessarily. And we bridge that experience through technology, which is amazing. You have diving gear that allows you to stay for hours and you keep breathing underwater. That's pretty magical, I think. And I, of course, I built, just as you mentioned in the first question, you build friendships and connections with these others, and whether you know it or not. And of course, I really loved my fish and appreciated them, but I was also being trained as a scientist, and the kind of science that see these others as objects of study, not as subjects. So as objects, you can do whatever you want. And in animal science, many of the objects of studies are then sacrificed at the end. And we have ethics committees at the university, and I eventually ended up sitting on these committees for 3 years, trying to change things. Very difficult. But the idea is like, well, I applied for my ethics approval. If the ethics committee says that everything is ethical, I can slaughter my fish, no problem. As long as you do it humanely, it's okay. So we kind of wash our hands of the responsibility towards these other in this way, and it's done. And we are trained to think that that's okay because everyone else is doing it. And I remember there was one student while I was in the same cohort, while I was doing my PhD, and she was a Buddhist as a background. So she couldn't kill anything. And we laughed. It's like, how can you be a scientist, a proper scientist, if you're not prepared to sacrifice your animals? Yeah. Big lessons were coming for me. I just didn't know at the time. And I was just a product of my training, which I'm very grateful for, because it allowed me to understand many things later. But so I was just in the field doing my studies and doing my thing, like every other season. And there was nothing special about it, in the sense, nothing different to me, until I remember that I decided to, my experiment after 3 or 4 months of, interacting with the same group of moms on the reef. And these are wild animals, so, they don't know you. You build that relationship. And these are animals that were doing the fishy business and obviously very scared of the human arriving. And then getting to know me and getting to know that I wasn't a threat, because day after day, every day, all day, I will be there. And I wasn't trying to do anything evil. So they trusted me. And at the end of the experiment, so after 3-4 months of this, I betrayed the trust. And I went in, and I remember that morning changed everything, because I went in the water. And I didn't have any other gear except my diving gear. And all I wanted to do was to say goodbye. And that was just a thought in my head, or wherever thoughts are. I didn't have any, I wasn't diving with catch bags or anything that was giving me away. And yet, when I went in the water, nobody came out to greet me, as every day they did. Nobody was there. Everyone was hiding. And the more I approached, the more they were looking at me from the little holes in the reef, like thinking, nah, you are not good news today. And in that moment, the more, that was a big stretch of reef. I had a lot of pairs I encountered a lot of fish to connect with. And in that moment, as I'm swimming, thinking, one part of me is thinking like, where are they? What's going on? And another part of me knows exactly what's going on. And I don't think I had the courage to acknowledge it straight away. But when you do, then you know that these other, apparently inferior, apparently less evolved than you, according to science and my training, actually had worked out precisely who I was. They knew that today Monica's not good news because she's not Monica coming to visit and connect. She's coming to disconnect and to finish and compromise life. For what precisely? For a silly question. And I say silly in the sense like no question would be really worth the killing of another. And so, yeah, I just felt like this horrible dread. And I just went out of the water and I was like, that didn't happen, did it? And I remember now, it's a few years ago, but I gave a lecture. It took me 10 years to share this story in the academic space. And I gave a lecture for the first time speaking of this event. And I used it as an example of what fear and guilt and grief do when we are facing a situation that is so compromising. And we realize of the damage that we are causing. And I went through the guilt because I came out in the afternoon of that day. And when you're frozen with fear, you just the most immediate reaction is to do precisely what you already know, because you're trying to find a safe place to fall back into. And so what I already knew was that you just get over it, you get in the water, and you get your data. So I went back in the water and I went and caught them all. And they fought for their life. And now suddenly I'm the enemy, I'm not a friend. But it was the last time I did that again. And and I remember giving this lecture, and it took me 10 years to process this experience. And when I shared it, I thought like, they're gonna think I'm mad. But I think I was already kind of not caring that much anymore about their opinion of me. And of course, I then realized that my experience, well over 10 years ago now, it's actually a mini version of what the world is going through now, in the context of like, whoa, I made all of this damage. And now I feel guilty. I feel afraid because I don't know. And the first reaction is I'll just pretend, I'll deny, and I pretend that, I can just carry on as usual. And now we're getting to processing the grief. And it's necessary, because guilt freezes us in place, and it's good. A little touch is good, but not too much. Otherwise, you don't engage with the action of what needs to happen next. And I think that we done the guilt part of what we done on this planet with our not so kind presence in the last few centuries. And then we are processing the grief, and a lot of people is feeling the despair now. And it's good. We need to feel those emotions. And hopefully, if everything goes well, out of that comes inspired action and change. And it's a drastic change, but it becomes also naturally so. At least for me, my little Monica life's experience, I came out of the water that day with my fish. So I was fulfilling my duty as a scientist for the last time in that context. And it was very clear, like, I need to find another way. I cannot continue this way, which is what we have come as humanity. We need to find another way. We can't continue this way. And then, of course, I think the major ingredient for me was looking for answers, not in the science, which was where the problem was arising in my context, but inside. And I think, again, this is exactly where humanity is at, is people are trying to learn how to look inside. And for me, in that situation was, I went to do Vipassana for 10 days, which was something that I used to do every year. So it wasn't anything, again, out of the ordinary in my life. But that year, those 10 days were, oh my God, oh, so difficult, because I had to process my guilt and feel the deep grief of betrayal and betraying life that I am. And so I came to the compromise that I could become vegetarian as an initial bit of doing my part. And I did, literally. I finished the 10 days of Vipassana and I never turned back. And it wasn't like, I'm going to try to be good. No, I just became vegetarian right there and there. And that was the end of the story. And I never even tried to, I wasn't trying to be. I was simply that. And then, of course, I knew that I had to, if I wanted to remain a scientist working with fish, I needed to find another way to do the science. So initially I did a few studies where I was only taking data by observing behavior and not slaughtering anything. But it became very clear that the science that we do today demands the sacrifice. And, you get to the end of the study, you got your data, and even if the results are very clear or what's happening with this fish or these other animal, your colleagues have been trained the same way as you have been trained. So they're expecting, like, well, where is the organ? Where is the bloodshed? And not because we are like, bad people, simply we've been trained. We have trained people to do it in a particular way, and quite unconsciously, really. And then, I realized pretty quick that for me to continue working with animals in this way was going to become really hard. There were only so many questions that you could ask before running out. Doing it in this way that was non-impactful for the animal and for myself. And so there was a crisis, of course, as always. And I realized that maybe I couldn't be a scientist anymore. And the very moment I was prepared to let it go, and kind of did, so, okay, I had to let go of this. This dream is done. That's when I moved to Perth, and from the other side of the country. And and I started a garden in this new place where we moved. And and as I was planting the first few plants in the garden, which were basil and chili plants and very simple plants, that's when it started. It was like, hey, you can work with us. We don't mind if you take a leaf. And so I was like, okay, that's why my first experiments with plants, I know nothing about plants, but my first experiments with plants were with chilies and basil. And from there, then the entire thing evolved. And sorry, it's a long way, but that's how I started doing the work that I'm doing now.
No, that's take the long way as much as possible. No need to be sorry. So you were about to give up science, and then sort of the garden that you started drew you back into a different sphere.
I often say that the plants rescue the scientist inside me, and I don't, often people think that I speak in metaphors, and I hardly ever do. I am actually quite literal. So when I say the plants rescue the scientist inside me, I literally mean that.
Mhm.
And there will be no scientists here. There will be no science. The science that I've done, there will be none of that without them.
Mhm. Yeah, that's clear. Yeah, absolutely. There's from the little that I know about your career, it's been marked by some very courageous transitions, which I think you just described. And you're describing this sort of inherently destructive process that you understood it as being at the heart of this marine biology that other scientists were doing, and you made the decision and sort of pivoted, whereas others are continuing this inherently destructive process in the name of research. Besides the moral and the toll that it takes on the soul, do you think that way of working scientifically maybe is not as beneficial to the discoveries that could be made? They want the blood, they want the organs, but would observing something more long term, would we have more knowledge by doing it that way instead of just getting down to the nuts and bolts of the creature, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, no, you are a Theosophical society, so I speak to the converted. I am aware of that. I do not believe that what we are doing by fundamentally destroying the object of observation, because that's how the premise is for science, allows you to know anything. What you get to know is exactly what you put in there and what you decide that you want to see. But you have already disabled the possibility of encountering who is there. Because you have decided already that it's a what, not a who. And you have already decided that they need to fit within certain parameters. And the fact that you are, pulling them apart, well, you're going to know something that's been pulled apart. That's as far as you can go. You're not going to know who is there. And what I've learned and realizing, when I think of my career as a marine scientist, which was, a good half of my career, I'm very grateful that I was trained as I was. So I don't, I don't feel bad about what happened, in the sense that I processed my guilt, I went through my grief, and those emotions have been transcended, integrated and transcended, so that I can use that as a lesson, as a notion. If it happened, it's because I needed to learn something. And so the best that I could do out of those experiences was, oh, my dog just came in to say hello. Okay, Picasso, thank you. Was to put them to good use. So, and they would become very useful later on in my career, but I feel that science is missing the opportunity to really reimagine itself as a space for collaboration rather than a space for domination. So the science that we are still doing is a very colonial approach. It goes over and takes, dominates, pull apart, cells. The science that I think it's coming, and I like to hold that as a future possibility, or even like a possibility that is already being planted and just needs to grow, is a science of collaboration, where we don't need to pull apart anything. We just need to ask. And so the science will be a question of deep listening rather than deep pulling apart. And then the answers that we get are going to be very different. But that's part of the idea. I mean, like, science is always seen as this exploration of the unknown. And yet most of the science that is done these days is always about the known. We want to confirm what we already have glimpsed or we think we know. But when you are truly committed to the not knowing, then everything, literally everything, becomes a possibility, which means that you allow the other to be precisely what the other wants to be. And you don't have any expectations of what it should be. And so you're letting them free, and you're freeing yourself in that process. And then you might be surprised of the things that we got to learn, because we should really remember that we are the young ones here. And when I talk about the others, I'm not talking about just the plants or the animals, as you were mentioning earlier, like, rocks, and then we'll have like yet still a different timeline. They're all about times. And then if we want to go really, really in deep time, well, this planet has plenty. She was here before everyone else. And we are made out of her. So whatever she learned, we know, and we can know. And, like I've been, as you know, I will be coming to the US next month. And I need to give a keynote at the Garrison Institute for a planetary health meeting. And as I've been, tossing ideas and trying to think what it is that I want to speak of and open with. And I've been reading about the Ice Ages. I've been reading about her story. And like the very first Ice Age, which actually often is not even counted as the first. So was the very first real extinction event, because it killed 90% of life. It was the most dramatic and the most devastating of all the Ice Ages / extinction events that we have had. So it happened 2.3 billion years ago, and the Earth took 300 million years to think about a new experiment with life. After she did that one, she was like, I'm gonna sleep on this and think about it properly now, because that one didn't quite work out as I wanted to. And you see, with the arrival of complex life, the biological complexity actually increased. As the biological complexity increased, also the capacity of this planet to sustain life increased, because the planet and the biological bodies that she creates are sustaining and put in balance with each other. They create the balance together, which means that this is why extinctions are so bad, because you reduce the biological complexity, which means that you also reduce the stability of the planet itself. And but the important thing was for me to notice that after that very first event, so long ago, that I don't think our mind are actually really capable of even imagining. It could be magic. It could be like, some fairy tale that someone tells you, because it's like, I don't know, I cannot conceive what that number means. 2.3 billion years. It's like, what's that? And then even like 300 million years of Sleeping Beauty. What's that? And yet she never did an event that devastating ever again. Like we have had, obviously, serious extinctions events and serious ice ages, but that first one was the worst, and she never repeated that. It's almost, to me it says like she is learning, and if she is learning and improving the experiment of life over long times, then that's why we are all learning. As she improves her understanding of how to do life, we also are learning how to be life. And it's inevitable, because we are one and the same. So I would like to think that the reason that if she is really on a trajectory of complexifying so that she can stabilize, and really in a way this is also the foundation of the Gaia theory by Lovelock, and then we are on a trajectory of, as a human species, for example, we are on a trajectory of learning more and more. And the only way to really access that understanding and that knowledge or even wisdom, and then using it in a way that it's true to our name, sapiens, it is to start collaborating with the one and the ones, which are all the others, who know better because they've done this experiment before, and they've done it for many years, billions.
Yeah, there was they sorted it out and made the mistakes 425 million years before a nervous system existed, much less humans.
That's right.
Yeah, and that first great extinction event, and I might be mistaken, but that was sort of the Precambrian Great Dying, where plant life began to move onto the Earth, and the oxygen levels on the Earth became too high, and that stasis was thrown off. That you're describing. Yeah, so it's interesting to, it's difficult to think in a time span of billions of years, but if you're able to use your imagination to sort of compress that time down, you get an understanding of exactly what you said. You know, everything's learning, and if we're able to perceive plants as sort of, you know, plants made this mistake where the Earth's stasis was kind of thrown off balance, but they made that mistake 3.5 or 2 something billion years before we existed. Like, why would you not sort of honor plants and understand that they're building the world for us?
That's right. And also, I guess I wouldn't even call them mistakes. You know, I'm an experimentalist fundamentally as a scientist, and before you get to that experiment that works, the one that then you see on the papers and is published and it becomes the experiment. But you know how many iterations we do before that one? You know, by the time the audience outside the lab sees the final piece, we do a lot of pilots. We test all sorts of little components, little parts. Most often things fall apart and then you put them together again in a different configuration. And so all of that is part, like, you know, pilots are never really published, but pilots are so fundamental because are the way in which you get to the experiment that then is the final piece. And there would be none of that without the pilots. So the pilots are the process of learning. So for me, those extinction glaciation events are her pilots. She's the great experimenter here. She made life. So I think it's pretty amazing experiment that she's doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I needed to catch myself because I have 2 young children, and one of the things you're always reminding yourself of is there are no mistakes, there's just learning opportunities. So that Cambrian Great Dying was a learning opportunity in the great process that is this life. Yeah.
And interestingly enough, it was due to the fact that it wasn't actually a plant, it was a bacteria, cyanobacteria. And it was the beginning, it was the first one to be so ingenious in the experimentation that it was the first one to actually take the sunlight, use the CO2, which I think was like 2.5 thousand higher levels than we have today, and combine them together to create its own food for the first time ever. And that was like, oh, let's do this experiment. Let's see what happens if you take this and this, put them together. And of course, the waste product was oxygen. And as this process started happening, these guys realized that, oh, there is more CO2 and there is always sunlight. So they did more. And now, as we know, as I said, complexity, biological complexity, diversity, biodiversity, it's a key essential element for the ability of this planet to create a stable space for life itself to sustain itself and flourish. So when you have one species, in this case, the cyanobacteria, which we know as blue-green algae, but they're not algae as such, they're bacteria. They yeah, they did these grand experiments and they're like, oh, excellent, it works really good for us. Until then they realize, and of course, this is a very cautionary tale, I guess, because until, you know, you take the light, you take the CO2, and then after a while you run out of CO2. You took all the CO2 and you produce so much oxygen that you're killing everyone else who is not using oxygen, because until then nobody did. And not only that, but you're taking away the CO2 from the water and the atmosphere, and you're taking away in the process as well methane. And these two, CO2 and methane, are, as we know, are greenhouse gases. So the actual process was precisely the opposite of what we're seeing now. Like you drop those two and it gets very cold. And so complete, total glaciation. And of course, the very cyanobacteria who were making the experiment ran out of their own resources and drowned in their own waste. Yeah. So we are not inventing anything new, even in our crisis. Others have done it before. And that's the thing, though. This time there is complexity. And hopefully there is enough complexity to make sure that we realize how important that is in time.
There is a sad irony that I've actually mentioned a few times, that this early extinction event was all of the greenhouse gases being turned into oxygen, and the current extinction event that we're moving towards is exactly the opposite. Is you know, if you can take a far enough perspective, it's pretty humorous. But,
it is.
Yeah.
And there is nothing, you know, like we are calling it the Anthropocene, which from the beginning I never liked, because it's like, there is actually nothing that glamorous. It's not even like you haven't even invented anything new to even give it a name, to glorify yourself as a human. It's like, no, a cyanobacteria did it like billions of years ago. There you go.
Yeah.
That's where we are really coming from.
And if you put it on the timeline, the Anthropocene, it will be the smallest possible sliver of all of the times that have gone by. Yeah.
That's right.
Certainly. I have so many questions. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about, for those in the audience that aren't familiar with the story, could you talk a bit about your experience with the Sacoba in Peru and how that sort of influenced your scientific process moving forward? Because I think you learned that you just talked about you're grateful for learning kind of that structure in the marine biology, but what I find so exciting about your research is you come to the scientific method from a different place, and then you put it through this rigorous structure. And I really just enjoyed that story. I was wondering if you could share it.
Well, Sacoba is a big tree in the Amazon. I didn't know the tree. I never heard of it before. And I wouldn't really know it by name for a while. But I followed a series of dreams that were coming while I was in Australia at home. And these dreams were very vivid, very lucid. And I knew that they were containing information that I needed to follow through with. And so I did. And the dream was so clear that I knew that if I could find a picture of the man that I saw in my dream and the space that I was in my dream, I would be able to find it. So of course I went online and I looked into Google Images, and eventually I came across this one page. Literally, someone must have made it for this man. It was one little page, very simple, with 3 images. One image was the image of a hat with particular markings on it, and which was precisely what I saw in my dream. The second image was this man sitting on the floor, grinning, smiling in the picture, which was the man who was in my dream. And the third image was like a kind of a photo taken of a piece of brown paper upon which someone drew a map for directions. And there was this address And so I was like, okay, this is how we are finding this man. So I bought a ticket and ended up in Peru, near Pucallpa, and I just followed the instructions on this piece of brown paper. And even if I think about it now, it's like, who would do that? Why would I do that? Like, I don't know. But, this is how the story goes. And I followed the map and I ended up in this place precisely where this man was. And I ended up being there for a little while and doing a process that, for me now, I understand is a very scientific methodology of the indigenous kind. And it's a practice to enter in very clear and in a very clear and collaborative space with plants. And I didn't know, what Sokoba was, because when I got there, the curandero, he was the doctor of the indigenous doctor of that area. He just said to me, "Oh, you can start tonight." So I was like, okay, whatever it is that I'm starting. It kind of like it's weird even for me to tell the story, because it kind of like almost I arrive and suddenly as if he already knows what I'm there for, and I don't even know exactly what I'm there for, but here I am. And so for a few weeks I was sitting in isolation in this hut that I saw in my dreams, and the only person that I would talk to once a day would be him. He would come and check on me and see if I was doing okay, and the rest of the time was for me to be quiet and in isolation, and so that I could hear and listen to the plant. And at the beginning, I was like, I don't know if this is gonna work. What am I doing here? And I asked him, like, what is the tree that, what is this? And of course, he gave me its more traditional name, which is Vejago Caspi. And I was like, okay, it doesn't mean anything to me, but anyway. And he points and he's like, it's that one. And I look out, and for some reason, I look out and down to my hat and down on the ground. And I'm like, I don't know, there were a few bushes. Which one of those bushes is it? And it took me like a while to realize. And one day I had an incredible experience, and I wasn't, I was just sitting in my hat, in my hammock, and I had pretty much a psychedelic experience without having to take any psychedelic substances as such. And during that time, I realized that, it was a tree, not a little bush. And the tree was just sitting right where it was pointing, but I couldn't even see her, which of course triggered all sorts of other issues of blind blindness that then I delved into academically as well. And and I was just noticing how she was shining in the sunlight. And then, of course, he said to me, Bejako Kaspi means the one that shines and makes you shine. And so then this conversation with the plant really started, and the understanding that there are very, very specific methodologies that allows us as humans to enter in conversation with those that we think are silent, far from it. And they got lots to share if we have the patience and the time and the willingness to be open and arrive with no expectations. And so that was it wasn't necessarily the beginning. I realize now that by the time I go there, I had been primed by my plants in the garden, and by the experience with the fish that needed to break something so that I could break through. Mm-hmm. And then I repeated that experience, like in terms of the process of the dieta, many times since then, and spoken to many different plants, including plants who gave me very clear, very specific instructions, and they still do so.
Yeah, and the dieta it's the dialogue with the plant, where you're sort of on a limited diet, consuming just sort of that plant and just experience focusing strictly on it inside and out is the diet.
Yeah.
What maybe Socoba or you said there's other plants that you've had this similar process with, and they've shown you very clear things. What are some of the things that the plants have shown you that you've then moved into the academic field and sort of proved what the psychedelic vision was showing you?
Yeah, well, Ayahuasca, which is another big tree, also in the Amazon. Ayahuasca was incredible because she actually literally dictated the instructions of how to do the experiments that then became the Pavlovian P. So the P that learns like a dog. And I had attempted, that's why pilots are important. I had attempted to ask that question of associative learning before. And although technically I thought I was designing the experiment correctly, which probably I was, it should have worked, but it wasn't. And then I was still in the phase where I thought, well, it's not that the experiment is wrong, it's the plants can't do it. And so I kind of like, okay, that's it. Plants can't do this. Finished, end of the story. And then it took a few years later and I found myself back in the jungle and I'm talking to this tree through this same process of the dieta. And one morning I'm in my little confined space and I keep a diary because I know now that so much information flows through that I want to be able to have a record, because otherwise I will not remember everything. And and I found myself drawing and sketching in my diary the size of pipes and things that I need in different configuration and do this many of these and then try that and then do these and put it this way and that way and then repeat and repeat. And I was like, okay. And I was like, almost like as if I was watching my hand drawing and writing these notes as if it wasn't me, but I knew it was. And I was like, okay, whatever this is, I'm just going to follow through. And so when I came home from that trip, of course, I went, I was still working at UWA, the University of Western Australia, and I booked the space to set up the lab, and I set up the lab according to the instructions. And I started following the instruction that I was given to run the experiment. And 2 weeks in, it was pretty demanding experiment because it required a lot of time and a lot of presence at horrible times of the day as well. And but it was like, okay, this is what we do as work. Okay, let's do it. And after 2 weeks, it looked like to me, it looked like it wasn't working. And so I was like, I'm an idiot. What do I do? Like I go to the jungle and apparently some plants gives me some instructions. Apparently I write them down and sketch all of this stuff. And then apparently I come back home and I get into the lab. I set it up as if these instructions are actually real. And then I'm expecting this to work. Of course it's not going to work. What kind of madness is this? And so, yeah, I felt like an idiot. And I felt like, I just wasted 2 weeks of my life doing something. And like, of course, if I just stopped a second, I would have known that this made no sense whatsoever. And so the experiment was set up all in the dark. And so the only lights that were available were the lights that were part of the experimental design as part of the elements necessary for the plants to learn. And so I'm entering in this dark room, and it was a Sunday, as I also described in the book. It was a Sunday and on purpose because I just wanted to get in there with no one else around and just like dismantle everything, put everything away and forget about it. And so I went in to do this, to dismantle everything, to finish off. And I'm in this dark and cold room. And the only lights there, as I said, are the little blue lights in different parts of the experiment that are still running. And as I'm about to switch on the big light to stop everything and unpack or pack away, something inside said, like, just one more moment, just stop and wait one more moment. So I did, and I was like, what is it? What's going on? You need to look inside one more time. Go and have a look. So I, kind of like peered into my setup. And I cannot explain. I have no explanation really for what happened in that moment. But, for 2 weeks, I was there working with this setup and to realize that it wasn't working. And I was very convinced that it was not working. And then in that one moment, everything changed, and I was able to see something that until that moment I couldn't see. And not only that the experiment was working, but that the plants have been doing precisely what I was, kind of testing them for the entire time. And so there was this moment of like, again, is a break from the conventional space of where I was in. And suddenly you're moved into a new space that, allows you to see both. From the first place, you cannot see the other. But once you enter the other, you can see both. And so I was like, oh my God, this thing is working. Not only is working, but it's like I was about to destroy everything. And just because of my short-sightedness, literally, I couldn't see. Mm-hmm. And so that was not the moment when I packed up everything. That was the moment where I expanded the replication. And then it was months and months of work to actually run the full experiment. So all of this before that moment was piloting. That's why I say pilots are good, even if they never make it into the paper officially and people only see the cleaned up version of the work. And in this experiment in particular, part of my pilot was about engaging with the plant in the jungle and listening and working out precisely how do we together do this. And it just happened that I'm the human with hands, and I can make it in a human way that can speak to other humans. The plants don't really need to prove anything. They don't care. Mm-hmm. But they know that we need to be shown. Mm-hmm. And so otherwise we don't see, literally. And in that moment, I realized, and that's why I was saying before how important it was for me, and this is many years later, that event with the fish and my training as a scientist. I needed to be absolutely fully immersed into the conventional way of doing science at this time, to know what that is, to understand where my colleagues are at and when they attack, as they are doing still. And I just saw a few articles where this is happening again with a dear colleague of mine, Susan Simard. And it's like, these attacks are attack from a system that cannot see itself and itself in a context of a much bigger space. So it feels threatened and it attacks to be in defensive mode. But I used to get very upset because it is actually very hurtful when colleagues attack you. It's like, but I was just trying to do an experiment. What's wrong with you? Why do you have to be so aggressive? And why do you have to, and the attacks usually are personal, there's not like, I don't agree with your data. Look, my data shows something else. But it's always about opinion, and like, it's almost like they need to put into question your level of intelligence, even if that's, and so it's very hurtful, especially when they come like in groups.
Mm.
But as I know that Susan Simard has to go through now, we stand tall in support of the science that we do, because I know for myself, and I'm pretty sure I can speak for her too, we're not standing alone.
Mm.
And I'm not talking about other humans, but like we're not standing alone. This science is being made by across species. And so it's like, this is not even about science. This is about changing the human, opening up the human so that he can see a bit more of a broader picture, and he can see a little bit more where it's positioning itself and also where actually it could be.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, you mentioned in the book some of your colleagues sort of looking at you askance, and don't get too close to her. She's doing the strange stuff. But the thing that excites me about the work that you do is it starts at this very woo-woo place, this very psychedelic place. But then through your training, the science is sound. There's nothing, I don't think, people could attack you maybe for the outset. I can see scientists laughing at you because you sketch notes you received from a tree. I wouldn't laugh at you, but I could see how other more boring people might. But then you take it, and it's like I said, the science in the process is sound and it's valid. And that's what's so interesting and exciting is, I read so much of your colleagues, and it's either all woo-woo or it's all this like cold detachment. And there's this bridge that you're developing, and it sounds like your colleague that is also getting attacked is doing it as well. I don't think they can argue with the results in the process. They have trouble with the impetus, but who cares?
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, I had people, this is actually embarrassing, I would say. I had like, there was one particular group, a group of professors, some of them emeritus. So these are all the professors who have done their career, they are retired, like just let it go. And instead, like, they pulled together and wrote several opinion pieces, because that's all they can do. And just with this arrogance, and what they don't realize that, like, yeah, maybe some people, some of those who work like them will resonate and agree. But I would say that the majority, they might not say it, but I would like to believe that the majority of my colleagues might not say anything, but in the privacy of their own internal process, they will read this piece and they're like, oh my God, this is not collegial, this doesn't do anything. What are these people doing? And some of the emails that these people have written to me are just like, the empire strikes back. It's like, are you kidding me? What? How old are you? And these are the kind of stuff that I received, like of abusive things, like this is all bullshit. And it's like, wow, English is not my first language, but I think I have a few more words that I could use to describe something that I don't like.
Yeah.
This is it. That's all you can do, And if you think about it, if this was done in any other job situation, if this was in a business, these people will get sacked. Like, this is not behavior, And yet in academia, this is kind of like, in some senses, even cheered. Like, oh, these guys are the pilot, they are holding the fort, or they are protecting the empire, obviously. And there is another element that I don't think is trivial, and I'm not trying to be offensive to any of the men present here.
That's okay.
No, but it is like, they are your quintessential old white men with a beard and the patches over here on their jacket, and your quintessential, I'm the old professor. This is a very masculine environment, which academia is. And what are these young women doing? Subversing the status quo. And it's not by chance, I think, that the plants have chosen women in science to speak for this. I mean, Robin Wall Kimmerer, another one, Susan Simard, and there are so many young ones coming through. And yeah, the empire might try to strike back, but I think they are losing the battle and they don't even see it.
I think the attacks are probably a sign of them losing the battle. From an outside perspective, you know, I don't think they have a leg to stand on, because I'm a layman. I'm reading this stuff. I'm not part of the Athenaeum crowd, but your work is rigorous and dry, and like you discussed the pilots, there's not anything unscientific about what you're doing, and there's nothing that doesn't fit into their structure or their rubric. They're just getting offended because of your imagination.
That's right. But it's such a silly thing, isn't it? Because yet for the men who have created these heroic step forwards in science, you know, science is imagination. You cannot not imagine something, otherwise you wouldn't do anything. Like, you have to imagine something of a possibility to go and explore it. You don't just randomly explore things. We don't work that way. There is a something that pulls us towards something else, and that is imagination first, inspiration. When we imagine that there is a possibility, then we get fired and we're like, whoa, what is this? What if this was possible? And in this case, I think we are transcending even that. We are going further into like, oh, what if this collaboration, co-creation was possible? I could do this with plants, so I could do this with this planet. How amazing is that? And then if you think about it, we're actually not doing anything new, because our indigenous people and our ancestors, that's, I think, how we used to do it all the time, connecting deeply with the space that we are co-creating all the time, and honoring the fact that we are made of very basic elements which are shared across, and these elements in different configuration look different, might operate slightly differently, but ultimately they are one fundamental same. So
it's taking it back to the kernel of true scientific discovery. You said, you know, when you were a marine biologist, it was so much testing things that have already been tested and are already understood. It needs this great leap of imagination and this risk of writing down what the tree tells you in order to get to the next scientific breakthrough, I think.
that's right. In science, especially in grant writing, the science that tries to take leaps like this is called blue sky. So you are jumping into the blue sky and you have no place to stand on. And even then you had to create pretty strong argument based on previous work, which is fine, to justify why you would want to look at that. But the amount of funding given to blue sky science now, it's non-existent. So science, as I said, is a colonial endeavor, and it has been for the last few centuries the right arm of the colonial campaign, and now it's more than ever. Much of the work is financed by private companies who, of course, have specific interests. And I'm not saying that the scientists that are doing this work are compromised in any way, but a compromise must be taken, because you can't just take this money and do whatever you want. That's not possible. You have to report in your annual report, or in your whatever report that you do. You'll have to tell them what you're doing with that money. And if you tell them like, oh, you know, I just went to the Amazon and I just started talking to a plant and see what she had to say or he had to say, I'm pretty sure that some of these people will be very unhappy about you, and your money and your funding will be, cut off pretty quick. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's apt. I wasn't familiar with the term the blue sky research, but it makes sense that it would be hard to get funding for that because there's not many, the blue
That's
sky
right.
is not a intellectual property just yet. So until
That's right.
yeah. I wanted to ask you, you have a project called Resonant Earth that is
Sorry,
described
my
as
dog is coming to give kisses. Thank you, Picasso.
this is like an Easter egg for me because
This is
I've
Picasso.
heard about
Thank
Picasso.
you.
Yes, I know Picasso in the car next to you when you're going
Okay,
out to do your projects. This is hello,
that's
Picasso.
right. That's right.
Yeah, what you Resonant Earth, you describe it as a planetary regeneration through sonic midwifery. What
Mhm.
is Resonant Earth? What is this project that you're embarking on?
Ooh. No, it's like because this one is really testing me, and he's been testing me for a while, and it's long gestation process, this one. It was given during very deep retreat in complete darkness, and I just saw it as a complete vision of what could be done, and I saw it successfully happening. So it was like, oh, that's simple, and it's a vision that is been evolving as well. So what was shared at the beginning was just a little component of the more, I guess, practical or more. Sorry, I'm just going to close this door. There. Yeah. It was at the beginning during my darkness retreat. What I was given was pretty much like the most practical aspect of this, which is using sound as a tool to regenerate different ecosystems and different environments, using sound to basically link generations, because the majority of mortality and the time in the lifetime of most species that is most delicate is at the early stages of life, as we know as well for our own humans. So to create kind of safe spaces that can support this transition, using sound and acoustics as containers, was something that kind of was inspired by during this retreat. And it was very much like, oh, this is the sciencey part, really. You have to develop these incubators, basically, and then you have to see how they work, if they work, and how to, support the regeneration efforts that are already in place. When I looked at the success rate of planting, and these days we see a lot of planting effort, but planting alone, it's not enough. If this planting doesn't turn into forest, it's not enough. And actually, if it doesn't turn into forest, it's a waste of time. It makes us feel good, maybe, which is important, but in the end, it doesn't do anything. So the idea was like the reason why a lot of these planting don't work is because the mortality at the beginning is very high. And so can you support this early phase of life, which of course linked totally to what I was doing during my PhD with my fish.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm no stranger to these concepts, and then it evolved and is still in evolution. And I used to speak of the resonant earth in terms of science, so this part of the science, and then education. Like, we need to actually, if we don't teach people about systems and how ecologies work and how we are part of these ecologies, we are the ecologies that we are talking about with all the other species and the planet, then it doesn't really matter how many times we plant. If nobody cares and nobody knows how to care, then it's a waste of time again. So it was like, okay, we'll do the planting and support that. We teach the people how to care for that, and then we will change. And then as my own personal process continues, this vision got put sideways, upside down, and so then I had to come to terms with the fact that the last part, the last component, the spirit of the story, the role of spirit is actually primary. You know, I set it on the back, but it's like you need to engage with the spirit so that then it is inspired to learn, and it can see, and then it can act based on that, instead of like, oh, do the action, let's hope that someone learn about it and then that will change you. No, you need to change first, change your attitude, your consciousness, or whatever we want to call it, and you're open to learn in different ways. And I learned that through my own experience. And as we were talking about before, unless there is this shift internally, you cannot see, even if you want to, you cannot see what is right in front of your eyes. And I was there, you know, during my experiment. 1 second before, I was unable to see, and the next second it was so crystal clear. But that started from a shift inside somehow, and then I could see, so I could learn what was possible, and then I could act. And so then it became like, whoa, okay, so if spirit comes first, education comes after, and science is at the back of this, how do you start? How do you implement this? And of course, over the years, I've been sitting in ceremony and all sorts of rituals for a long time, and especially in the last 15 years, I've been facilitating the creation of these spaces too. And in the last few years, as I've been tossing around with this project, I was given lots of opportunity to learn about my own capacity for holding in these containers where people can come and find the space that is co-created to open to wider possibilities. And so that was very interesting for me, especially because, of course, like I have to find a balance between that part of me and the part of me that is the scientist. Mm-hmm. And I don't see them as in conflict, but still in the world as it is for now, I need to balance them up. And to be honest, that right now I am at another transition point. Mm-hmm. So the last 6 months of last year, everything stopped. And literally, whenever I sat in meditation, I walked with Picasso, I was in ceremony, and I was like, just tell me what you want me to do next. You know, I'll do it. Just tell me what to do. I'm confused now. I don't know. I feel lost. And the answer was always the same. You need to stop and you need to let everything go. And I'm like, what? I'm asking you to tell me what action to take, and you are telling me to stop. And eventually I had to, like, literally my body started like stopping for me to make sure that I would stop. And yeah, every time I would try to think of this project, it would just total chaos would unleash literally in my life. So it was like, we said stop, we said let it go. And you know, as we were talking about earlier in the conversation, and you know, I remember when I had to start working with the plants, there was a point, right, where I had to just let my scientists go
Mhm.
and really believe that that was the end of her, that she was done. And only then it was possible for the plants to come in and say, actually, no, you're not done, and now we can talk to you. So, but I needed to believe that. And now I think I'm exactly in the same place. So I've been letting go of the scientist. And yeah, she's not very inspired in
Mhm.
anything in terms of science. She doesn't feel like she has anything more to give to science. And maybe she's really done. And if not, then she will be guided.
Mhm.
And but at this stage, I think I have arrived at the end of that line, and I have no idea what's
Mhm.
coming next. But I have learned on the way that this might be precisely the space I need to be.
Yeah, I think I liked what you said about sort of putting spirit at the front and science all the way in the back. I think the science is valid, but it's for the white beards and the elbow patches. And I think whatever path you're on now, just like with the plants, I think the science will creep back in, but the science is the spoken part. And
Mm.
that's sort of the last step. That's the driest part, but that's how you share it with others, I think. So I resonated a lot with what you said about put the science in the back and even give it up and say goodbye to the science Dr. Gagliano, because it'll come back naturally once the spirit part is there, I think. At least I hope it does. I
If
need to
she
read more stuff.
serves, well, if she serves the purpose, she will be called in, But I guess yeah, whatever it is that I need to do to serve this picture, it will create the condition for whatever it is to emerge, and it might not be me as the scientist ever again.
Mhm.
And I'm at peace with that.
I look
When I
forward to
said
whatever.
I have mentioned these to people like, close to me, and they're like, oh no, that's not possible. No, you're just in a moment. And I'm like, but I'm actually feeling really deeply that whatever I had to give to science as we know it, I've given it. And I don't know what I have to give. I'm sure I have plenty to give, but I don't know what I have to give and how. And but I guess that's the process. That's the keep walking, and so I am, I'm just waiting in this space of unknowing.
Hmm. That's a
And
very
it's not,
exciting. That's an exciting place to be.
yeah, for those who are watching you, but not for
Yes.
you inside
I think.
especially if you want to know, I just
Yeah.
like, just tell me. But it's like, if you tell me now, maybe I'm not able to hear it.
Mm,
So I think plants in a way have a lot to teach us, because they are very giving, and they're not concerning themselves with the silly things that we concern ourselves with for no particular reason. And then they are fully present with their purpose of being here. I'm going to take sunlight, I'm going to make green leaves, and I'm going to donate them, give them abundantly, because that's what life does. It gives abundantly. So the question is often, what can you give abundantly?